guys, welcome back to the Paradigm Project. I'm super excited for today's episode because we have current Scholar Body President Enoch Endemano and President-elect for next year, Garrett Shugk, on today to talk about servant leadership. Before we actually get into some of the discussion, I want our listeners to get to know you guys a little bit better. So Enoch, we'll start with you. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, your interests, your career plans, I guess.
My name is Enoch Endemano.
Middle name?
Enoch Gabriel Endemano.
Thank you.
Yes, that is my name. I plan to go on a mission and then go to college, and I'm really not sure what I want to do with my career.
Do you have any hobbies? At all?
No, actually.
Are you a person?
Sort of, because...
Do you do things?
Yes, I do, actually. I don't remember what any of them are right now. No, I've been the president of Paradigm for the past year. I've enjoyed that immensely. And yeah, that's actually pretty much it, because I did that, so there were no other hobbies.
Enoch, in the before times, before you were president of Paradigm High School, what did you like to do?
I like to dance, ballroom. I'm in choir. I forgot about that. I'm learning how to play the piano. I know how to play a 5-finger scale in the key of C.
That's a hard one.
I'm not that interesting. So
you're a really boring person. You're like the human equivalent of a mayonnaise sandwich.
No,
So no, this is going somewhere important. How did that lead to you becoming the leader and face of Paradigm?
I don't think I'm like, the most interesting person in the universe, but a mayonnaise sandwich is a little far. I would say that I learned how to commit, and I sort of discovered and fell in love with the ideas of Paradigm and of servant leadership and what that meant and how it works. I care a lot.
It's like mayo and cheese.
Yeah.
Garrett, are you also boring, or do you have hobbies?
I don't think Enoch's boring. I've learned a lot from Enoch. He's great. But the question's hobbies, or like what I like to do, who I am. That type of
whatever.
Stuff. Right, Garrett Charles Shugk. That's my full name.
Write that down. Write that down.
5'11". In shoes, it's like 6 feet. So you can just call me 6 feet if you want to. So my hobbies, I play a lot of sports.
He's trying a little hard on that one.
I'm active, so I play a lot of sports. I love going hiking, and I go rock climbing all the time. Anything that's competitive or athletic, I love that type of stuff. But on the flip side, I love a good book, and I play percussion, so not very well, but I do play percussion. I'm in band. I play the drums.
But you like to hit things.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's about it. And I am president in training next year, so that's exciting.
So what made both of you interested in running for a student body office?
Garrett, you go first.
Okay. I think a common rumor for those people who know me is that since all my siblings ran and won, that I should. And at first I believed it, and that was my original motive to run, right? But then I got into more of why I wanted to run personally and what impact I would even have on the school. I had to figure out why I wanted to run personally. And once I came to terms with why I wanted to run, which was because I could make an impact on the school, and I could touch people's lives, and I could have connections, and I could better myself in the end and grow as a person, because there's a lot of really challenging things that come along with being president. And I'm sure Enoch could have a really big list of that. And already I'm starting to experience that. So I'm very excited, and I think it's going to be a great year. So that's why I wanted to run.
It's fantastic.
I had thought about running I came here first sophomore year. That was my first year I was here. I was very impressed with the president that year, Justice, who's actually Garrett's big brother, for anybody who doesn't know that.
Little brother now. I am taller than Justice.
Are you really?
Wow.
And bigger. Way bigger.
Dude,
not
you
on steroids,
bulked up
though.
like crazy, bro.
I saw that they had like a good time, so that was kind of attractive. And then that year, the person I voted for became the president, and that was Emma Conley. And I asked to be on her cabinet, and she appointed me to be on cabinet, and I wanted to do it because I thought I had skills that I could bring to the table that would be effective for what Paradigm needed at the time, and that it would be a party, which was true. And it was absolutely fantastic. And the whole year, I loved it. It was so great. COVID started at the very end, and that was interesting to figure out ways that we could work with people to make things happen. And I had actually decided not to run before I obviously decided to do so. And as it got closer and closer, I didn't know that if other people who were running, both of them would have done great. I know that. But
who were the other people who were running that year?
Regan Hurlbutt and Jackson Checketts. And I'm dear friends with both of them, and I'm very impressed with their abilities. But I felt that I had seen it from a different perspective. and that some of these people were going in with ideas that we knew couldn't work, and that I would be better as a crisis manager, which was probably what the school year was going to be. And it has been. And so it was a level of like, I know I can make an impact, kind of like what Garrett said. And I think I'm sort of uniquely qualified to do it right now. And so I did.
So Enoch, before you brought up the idea of servant leadership, which is a huge idea at the school. I mean, it's something that's always been thrown at us. And Garrett, you can also answer this too, but literally what does it mean to be a servant leader?
A servant leader is someone who is in a leadership position because their motivation is to serve. And that sounds no duh, but also there's more to it. There's a level of the greatest among you is the least. This idea is very old of servant leadership, where I'm not the king who gets, all your taxes and worship by you. And if I say go to war, you go to war just because I want to. I'm everybody's servant and representative. That's how that's different. Where if I'm a servant leader, to do that. So that's kind of where you would see that is, does this person lead because they, what's their motivation? What is the motivation? And when it is service, when it is to improve the whole, when leadership is just the position you hold within, making something better and serving other people, that's servant leadership.
Garrett, what do you think?
Enoch did a great job at explaining that. He really hit on some good points about servant leadership. And it really is, it's just the difference between leadership and servant leadership is that when you're just in a leadership position, it's how you look at it. So if you're just looking at a leadership position as a place of power where you can just tell people what to do and how to do it, it's not going to go too well. But if you're looking at your place as a leader, whether it be earned or whether it be appointed, you should always look at it as a servant leader. Ways to do that is to just be with the people that you're leading instead of being higher than them, but still being able to lead them, which sounds tough. And it is tough. It's much harder to be a servant leader than just a leader because you can't just tell people what to do and how to do it whenever you want. You have to actually see them as a person, hear their thoughts and opinions and ideas, and then try and put those forward rather than just your thoughts, opinions, and ideas, right?
And I like what you said about you're with them. I heard someone, I don't remember who it was, but it stuck with me. I'm not going to ask any of the people who work for me to do something I wouldn't do.
Yeah, I've heard that too. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's the level of that's servant leadership.
It's interesting because the idea I have of servant leadership is slightly different in the way of, if I'm correct, the way you guys were saying is that like being a servant leader has a lot to do with your motivation and why you're stepping into a leadership position. When I think about it, I think of somebody who becomes a leader because they serve. So like they're leading through their actions, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't think those are different.
I think that's the same thing.
Really?
Yeah.
I think a servant leader has a big, broad look, and it's just however you want to perceive it. But the main objective or the main goal of a servant leader is just to serve. And lead at the same time, rather than just lead. Okay.
The servant part comes first because even when you're not leading, you're serving.
So I actually was able to find that quote. It says it's attributed to John T. Chambers. Never ask your employees to do something you wouldn't be willing to do yourself.
Yeah.
And I actually think that's a really powerful quote as far as like servant leadership goes. And I think when I see that from people in positions of power, it is definitely very helpful as far as like, do we want you to be doing this or not? I feel like that kind of like sums up what to me a servant leader is, right? It's this type of guy who's going to get there and say, oh, we all have to work late tonight. Well, I don't have to be here. I'm the boss, but I'm going to stay with you guys till it's done. And like, that type of thing. And so I've always seen, especially from you, I guess just because I've been noticing it, that you're always, like on cabinet events, you're always going to be the first to be there and the last to leave, if at all possible. I mean, you might be a little late, but you're always going to be that guy who you are the captain of the ship and you're running things and you're going to go down with the ship. Right. And that's like the service.
Like you said, it is. You set the example and then you hope that they'll follow that example rather than you set the mandate or the command and you tell them they have to follow the command. So it's really leading by example. Is another way to put it.
So we have a definition of what a servant leader is, but if anybody out there listening is like me, they really just won't care unless there's something to remember it by. Like, is there any examples of like people you know or books you've read that are like a prime example of servant leadership?
I would probably say Man's Search for Meaning, because Viktor Frankl, he's an amazing person. That book, if you haven't read it, it's absolutely life-changing. And I didn't believe Miss McCoy actually said it it was my 9th grade year, and we were reading it, and she said it was going to be life-changing. And I didn't believe her because I was dumb. I still am, but I'm less dumb than I was in 9th grade, I think.
You're just taller now.
Yeah. And so that book, it is life-changing, and I read it again in 11th grade, and I got way more out of it in 11th grade than I did in 9th grade because I just didn't care as much. And I actually got a little intimidated and scared because it is a really tough book to read. And so once I got to the points in the book in 9th grade where it was talking about all the torture things that was going on and all the horrible things that were happening, I just couldn't read it. And so I stopped. And I just told him that I got 50% out of the book, and I think I still passed, hopefully. But now that I've read it again, it's super impactful. And he set the example at the beginning, and he wasn't telling people what to do or yelling at them, or he didn't show really fear. He just set the example of trust in
the mind
and the higher power, that it'll work out. And if you have that trust, it'll overcome everything. And it's just so amazing how he can just, in the worst place possible in the world, he can still have control of his own mind and his own thoughts and be able to impact people by impacting himself.
For background, Viktor Frankl was imprisoned in a concentration camp in Auschwitz, and he ended up working kind of for the camp as a psychiatrist and a therapist. And so he did get some background into like those who really just like gave up or whatever.
Garrett is really quite a prime example. I love what he said, and also the Viktor Frankl story. That's incredible. Theodore Roosevelt, I think it was the third or junior, I can't remember. He was a general in the Second World War.
He's the guy in the night at the museum. Is that the Theodore Roosevelt?
No. He was dead.
Let's just say yes and pretend, because that dude's the best.
Okay, but it's like his kid.
Right.
So he's still cool.
Okay,
Anyway.
fair enough.
So Teddy Roosevelt, number 2, he was known as a frontline general. One of those men who he went with the troops, he stayed with them, and they loved him for it. You'll see throughout history, probably most of you haven't studied generalship and warfare as much as I have, but
That's what I read before I go to bed.
of course, generals and leaders like Alexander the Great, that's another really good example of that.
Yeah, he's
That
amazing.
is a good
They
example.
called him the Great for a
Yeesh,
reason.
we gotta talk about him.
I mean, yeah, because he was with his men, and he expected of them what he expected of himself. And he actually expected more of himself than he expected of them. And both expectations were high. Anyways, and he was a fantastic general, partially because his men were so loyal. So that was cool. Anyways, that's something where I see where it's servant leadership, where those men were there. Less Alexander, because he was literally conquering a kingdom for himself, but he did give away a lot of it to them. American generals who do well, they fight. They don't fight as much, but they're with the men, and they expect of themselves more than they expect of the soldiers under their
Like
command.
more morally than others, or like physically? 'Cause
It's
I
kind of
feel
like
there's
what
a difference.
Dallin was talking about. They're up earliest, they're to bed latest. They work as hard, if not harder, than
Got
any
it.
of the rest of everybody.
I always felt like George Washington, was my favorite example of a certain leadership. And all my
Mhm.
research I've done of him, I've always been impressed by his character and really just the kindness and, I don't know, the respect that he showed for the people he was leading. Like, he knew he was in charge, and he knew that he had to make the tough decisions. But people respected and loved him because he was kind and he cared about people.
Yeah, and I think there's also a negative side to servant leadership where you can still be a servant leader, but you're having a bad impact. Like Maximilien Robespierre from the French Revolution. He was... What?
Who?
I love that you just have his name, just like, oh yeah, that guy, Maximilian Robespierre.
Robespierre. Okay.
I don't have an accent.
Maximilian Robespierre.
But he was a servant leader.
Robespierre.
He was a servant leader. He was in the streets with the people who were going against the king and the queen, and he was there, and he was in the streets, and he was pushing with them, and he was fighting with them, and all that type of stuff, while still leading and being at a place of power. And the outcome, debatably, whether it was good or bad, what happened, obviously the death wasn't good, but the outcome from the French Revolution is debatably whether it was good or bad. But still, him being a servant leader, he used his servant leadership to push forward to something that wasn't necessarily good, and that ended in a lot of deaths. So when you're put in that place of power, you have a choice whether to lead to something good or lead to something bad. And it's like it's a responsibility to be a servant leader.
See, and I disagree with that. I don't think you can be a dictator and a servant leader. Robespierre was entirely a dictator. The idea, maybe he was in the streets. He had no power beforehand. So killing the king and the queen was literally the only, the revolution was what set him up. I'm not terribly familiar with his rise necessarily, but the Directory and Robespierre, those sorts of people, I would never call them servant leaders because they were bad. They were horrible for the people who they lived under. And there's a difference between being dumb and being bad. And Robespierre was a dictator who was bad and was doing those people harm and silencing dissidents and any opposition to his reign. I see him more as a Stalin or a Lenin character who didn't have long enough to become that than as a George Washington or even Alexander the Great character.
But how do us as, the people underneath servant leaders or not those in those servant leadership positions, how are we supposed to tell? Like, there's not like a rule book on...
If lots of people are getting their heads chopped off, it's probably bad.
Can I disagree with Enoch before we move forward?
Yeah.
Can I also disagree with Enoch a little bit before we move forward?
You guys do that a lot anyway.
Cutting them heads off, I would say, actually.
He came up from almost nothing. He had a horrible family life and very, very corrupt childhood. And then once he got to his adolescent years, he took the choice whether to either just fall into what the rest of his family was doing and live in poverty or work his tail off and get to a place of power or leadership. And he chose the second one. And he was appointed to give a speech to the king and the queen because he went to a really good school. And he talks about when he got there to give a speech, the king and the queen were in a hurry, and so they didn't care to listen. And he took that as a personal offense, and he held it to himself to use that as some of his motives. Now, servant leadership, we often push towards something as a good thing, but he used that motive, which is a bad motive because he was offended and his feelings were hurt, but he pushed that motive forward, and we saw throughout the whole revolution. Now, he started from ground zero, just like everyone else. He was getting mistreated by the king and the queen, just like all the other citizens, and that's why they had a revolution, right? We know that from history. And so the fact that he started at ground zero and he worked his way up, and then I would agree with you. I think he did get corrupt eventually. I think he was corrupt from the beginning, but what he was doing was he was trying to help the people. And he was trying to set that example of we need to either fight or die. We're already dying. And so if we don't fight, we're going to die out. So he set that example and people followed. The example was not good. And it ended in, like you said, lots of heads getting chopped off by the guillotine and lots of horrible things happening. But that base example was set, and he, I would say, was a servant leader during that time.
So I guess if that is true, what are we supposed to do? Like, how are we supposed to...
Are we supposed to tell who
like
who the real servant leaders are?
Yeah.
Well,
I think it's what Enoch
if your
said.
people you do what they did to Robespierre, chop their head off.
Yeah, he ended up getting his head chopped off.
The people
true.
rejected him in a big way. So I think it's fairly obvious when you have situations like that. There's a level of if it's about a motivation, then it is really hard to tell. Maybe not actually. Who's the servant leader and who is just stupid? Because we're all stupid sometimes. You can't expect a perfect servant leader. The leaders strive for that ideal, and they will fall short. It's just
Definitely.
a fact. And so we can't be too quick about those things. But servant leaders, do you hate working with them?
I think it's also, not trying to quote myself, but like where the motive is coming from. So we could see throughout history that Robespierre's motive was horrible, and we knew that from the beginning. So he was still a servant leader, but it's picking out where the motives come from, and you can do that just by talking to the person, right? So if you're wondering why they do certain things, you can come up to them and you can ask them, and then you can figure out if that motive is coming from somewhere bad or if it's coming from somewhere good. And we want to go with the person that is coming from somewhere good. That's
True.
what people want to see.
Enoch, you talked about how, servant leaders aren't perfect, right? So, in a situation in school, when you're trying to be a servant leader, how do you deal with that, personally? Just, knowing that you're just going to mess up?
You just know you're going to mess up, and when you do better next time.
What was that quote that you had, Dallin?
The quote is, John T. Chambers, never ask your employees to do something you wouldn't be willing to do yourself.
Yeah, I think that corresponds with the leader as well. So you can't expect perfection from either end, because since we're human, it's never going to be achieved. You can just expect that we're giving our best effort. And if we put our best effort forward, just like the quote says, if we're expecting the same thing, there's going to be that connection that we're looking for. But like Enoch said earlier, we can't be perfect. We're going to mess up. But how you have to deal with that is how you would want other people to deal with that. So it's kind of like putting each other in your own shoes. And it's really hard to do, but if you can expect that we give our best effort, that's how you can achieve that.
You just do better next time. That's kind of how life works, you know. You make reparations as what you can. I apologize for anything dumb I do that I remember. And yeah, anyways. So you mess up, you make it right, you move forward, and you don't worry about it anymore.
If you had to emulate one servant leader for the rest of your life, just one, who would it be?
Probably Jesus Christ from the New Testament. So Jesus actually, you can see the products of his leadership in think about the group that he surrounded himself with. They were people who he could serve, and he did so very effectively. And we can see the results of that by the fact that Christianity is one of the largest religions in the world today, and also think about the stories from the New Testament about the people whose lives he touched. He was constantly serving others. He taught that to other people. And I won't give a list of stories like that, but I think that's the best example of servant leadership that I can think of is Jesus Christ.
What about you, Garrett?
I mean, he stole mine. We see throughout Christ's whole life. I mean, he washes his apostles' feet. He dies on the cross. He suffers in the Garden of Gethsemane. I mean, everything he ever did was being a servant and a leader at the same time. And he set his example at the very beginning. He knew what his purpose was, and he achieved that purpose. And all we can do is just strive to be like him, which is super, super hard. But, I mean, you really can't get much better than Christ.
What are some notable U.S. presidents that are not servant leaders from not the last 50 years?
So I would say that's a difficult question, Dalin. That's all I gotta say. That's a difficult question.
All of them.
What an astute observation. I would
Except
probably
Washington.
say, I think it was James Buchanan, who a religiously persecuted minority, actually my faith heritage, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at the time. The president of it, Joseph Smith, went to him and said, "We've been to the courts and we've been to the governor of Missouri, and neither of them will allow us our basic religious rights. So will you do something?" And he said, "No, I will not. Your cause is just, but I cannot help you." And Joseph Smith's comment on that was that his dog would do a better job than James Buchanan, and because his dog knew to protect his master. And the people are the masters of their leaders, if they're supposed to be servant leaders. So that's probably the example. That's the example that comes to mind as far as U.S. presidents, is someone who is not a servant leader and was too concerned with his votes.
What do you feel like servant leadership looks like in a school setting? Let's go to Garrett first.
Yeah, I was about to say, I can start with that one. What does servant leadership look like in a school setting? Well, I think it's one of the easiest ways to be a servant leader is because you have 8 classes that you go to just like every other scholar at the school, and you have late homework nights, and you have stupid assignments you don't want to do, and you have all that stuff that all the other scholars do. And so it puts you in a place where it kind of makes it easier because you're not so separated from the people. You literally are the people. You're walking in the halls with them. And so just setting that example and caring about the school, caring about your grades, not just to get the grade, but to present quality work and to show that you work hard and you care about your education. I mean, that's what Paradigm is all about. It's about owning your education. It's about creating connections that last lifetimes. It's about bettering yourself and becoming the best person you can be. And there's so many gateways and things that do that Paradigm sets up. I mean, it's an amazing school. I've loved it ever since 7th grade, where I wore the same exact pair of shorts every day, and I would tell people I washed them just so they'd get off my back, but I didn't.
You've come a long way, Garrett. Good job.
Let's
Yeah, I wash my shorts now.
like,
he didn't
once
get
a
more
month,
shorts, just washes them.
Yep.
You were talking about some of Paradigm's values. Why do you think being a servant leader is one of them?
Well, especially being president-elect, I think it's a very important one. But even if you're not president-elect, it's still an important characteristic to have. Because if everyone is looking at themselves as like better than someone else, or that they know better than someone else, and that they can demand them to do certain things because of that, it puts a lot of us in a bad situation. And since a main thing that we do at Paradigm is discuss, you have to look at people as people, and you have to discuss on a base level. You can't think that you know more or that you know better than someone, because everyone's insight and everyone's opinion matters. It's just how you take their opinion and their insight. Definitely with the way that Paradigm is set up, with the discussion-based everything, that we definitely need to be servant leaders, and we definitely need to look at ourselves as equals and as human.
So just to add a little bit, I don't think it's just a value of Paradigm. I think Paradigm is doing its job to prepare people and mold them to be successful adults and contributing members of society. This is not a Paradigm value. None of the values of Paradigm belong to Paradigm. You can't claim something that's as old as humanity as just ours. And so I think that's something to keep in mind, is that it's a Paradigm value because it's a value. It's a real thing. And so that makes it kind of a lot cooler, where this isn't just about here, and it's not just people here who understand this or are talking about this or are really, really like very good at it. This is a universal value. This is a universal truth that servant leadership is important, and that servant leadership is the best way to do things. And that's why it's a Paradigm value. It's Paradigm value because Paradigm is a school that's trying to help us to become great people and not just know information. And so, I mean, we get a lot of information too, but it's a value important to becoming a person. And so it's a Paradigm value.
Yeah, Miss Maurer one time said, if I can quote her, that she said, Paradigm is a magnet for good people and just brings good people in. And I think I would definitely have to agree with you that, I mean, it's not just a Paradigm value, but Paradigm values truth and happiness and personal growth. And so those amazing values like servant leadership comes into play, because that's what we're looking for. And it's lifelong things that we learn here at Paradigm. Even though high school is just a short 4 years, and I'm sure that's starting to kick in for some of our seniors, that it's over way faster than we think. And so it's just how we take that and how we want to push forward and learn and grow, and Paradigm just sets it up for us to do that.
I like what you were saying about how Paradigm attracts good people, because I think, because we're so small, and I guess our vibe as a school, I feel like it requires you to do your part. And so I guess it makes me wonder, because I've always wondered, like, saying like I am a servant leader, right? How am I really a servant leader if I'm not put in leadership positions? Because they say oh, it's just your example, but like it doesn't always feel the same, if you know what I mean.
Of course, it doesn't feel the same. You're not in the same position. However, I like to share a little thing. Actually, one of the best examples of being a servant leader when you don't have a position of authority is the person who I ran against, one of them, Jackson Checketts. He was very confident. He was ready to win. He was ready to go. They were involved and ready to move. And I won, and he wound up with no position within the scholar body government at all. And I've seen Jackson lead in really important ways that had nothing to do with position. Nothing at all. He's been a good example of what a friend looks like, of what reconciliation with people looks like. I mean, you guys were like not on speaking terms before, and now you guys like talk, like regular cordial people. Yeah, you talk. It's cool, and I've seen that with other people too. He's good at inspiring people and all these things, and no one's perfect, but I have seen how that is totally true. That it doesn't have anything to do with your position. And that's what servant leadership is all about, is that I'm serving, and sure, I may be in a position of authority or not, but I'm going to serve, and like Garrett said, set the example and stuff. That's what's really most important, what Garrett has been talking about, because there are things that, like administratively, you do have to make calls And if you have a position of authority, it doesn't matter if you're a servant leader or not, your opinion winds up carrying more weight because you have to make the decision. And so you try and get the best information you can to do that. However, there has to be a decision made anyways. And that can feel often like not servant leadership to the people making the decision. However, that's tertiary to real servant leadership. Real servant leadership is a way you are and a way you do. It's a way of being that carries over into positions. The position is not what it's dependent on.
Because I don't know what you were saying about like it's the way you interact with people, it's the way you reconcile and all that stuff. It makes me think, because at the end of the day, you have to make the call, Enoch, or Garrett soon, you're going to have to make the calls. But people who are not in that position that you are, or not even in your cabinet's position, them still, choosing to interact with you, to see you as a human being, to communicate with you, ends up putting them in a leading position as well, because it influences the decisions you guys make.
You see, and I think that's not necessary. I see what you're saying, I think, but I think what's more important is like there are people who I don't know who are leaders. There are people who I don't talk to. I talk about Jackson because I've seen it on a more personal level, because we are good friends. However, I've also seen other people who I don't know, and they've done a good job, and I've heard about things that they've done and positive ways they've influenced things. And so, like, yes, but also, once again, the position is tertiary. The position is important, and it comes with certain duties and things that must be understood and must be respected. However, servant leadership is something you can do from wherever you stand. You lift where you stand, and it doesn't matter what corner of the table you're on, as long as the table gets lifted, it's good. As long as you're doing your part.
What do you think the key elements are to being a servant leader? Because, it's easy to say you can do it from wherever, but if you don't know how, other than serving and leading, being a good person, like there are things that, there are elements that actually help, because, you can be kind, you can see people as humans, but that doesn't always help you lead. You know what I mean?
I think Garrett has already talked about this a lot, where it's you set the example, because you can't control people, like, period. It just doesn't work. But you can set the example. You can change the way you interact with people. You can make everybody's day around you a little bit better. That's serving. Servant leadership, the serving is first. The leadership just happens, because you will lead people to do good and be like you. And by being that, you give them permission to be that. And that's super cool to be around.
And it takes hard work. It's not easy to be a servant leader. And not that I'm saying I'm a pro or that any of us are pros, but it just takes a lot of hard work. Because being a leader, you can just tell people what to do and that's it. You don't care about their feelings or take anything into account, and it's not that hard. Especially if you're appointed to it, it's really not hard. But caring about people and putting in effort to really understanding what they're saying and where they're coming from, put yourself in their shoes, is a often said example, but it's so deep and meaningful. Trying to understand where that person is coming from and where you're coming from, that's what servant leadership is. It's coming to terms with people, understanding people, and really putting hard work in to being a leader.
A little bit to add on that, if you don't mind. Don't think about yourself too much. It's like, I've heard happiness is to be found in the not pursuit of happiness, but in the pursuit of, or joy or positive contribution. You focus on the other person. I've even noticed this principle in just regular interactions where if I'm embarrassed or I'm awkward walking into a room and I'm thinking, oh man, everybody's looking at me and all this stuff, and that's never true. I never wear anything that flashy, so that's not going to happen.
Yeah, well, you didn't rip your pants in front of Garrett, so I don't
That's
think
true.
you have a reason to be
That's true.
embarrassed.
Everybody definitely looked at you then.
Yeah.
But if I'm walking into a room of new people and they're super intimidated by everybody, I'm thinking about me. I'm not thinking about them. And so that's self-centered. That's self-centered. And it's stepping out of that and looking at other people and just forget about yourself. I'm going to serve you. I don't give a crap.
It's an immediate action.
And that's servant leadership. That's being the servant. And it doesn't You don't have to be thinking about, oh boy, am I being a servant leader right now? No, that's not the point.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a task. It should be.
You just do
You
it.
should crave it. You should crave being
And
a
that takes a
servant
little
leader.
work and like thinking through. And
Yeah, that's why the hard work aspect of it.
I walk
And-
into a room and I'm super intimidated. I have to think through, oh, wait a minute. I'm being self-centered. So I'm going to step outside of my comfort zone so I can get better at this. And also, I'm just going to focus on this other person. And you wind up meeting really cool people.
Yeah, and Jay-Z once said, I walk into every room as myself. So he knows himself. You're supposed to know yourself, but not focus on it. So you know your boundaries, your weaknesses, your strengths, but you put those boundaries and weaknesses and strengths forward to try and help people. You know yourself. You walk into every room as yourself. And that's what servant leadership is. It's great.
It's a way better way to look at the world and walk around.
Yeah.
Way more fun.
Okay, Garrett, as we're wrapping up, if you could have our listeners take away one thing from today, what would it be?
I would probably say know yourself. Understand yourself, because if you can do that, then servant leadership will be so much easier. And if you can understand that people care about you and you care about people, so if you just put your best foot forward and you put hard work into it and you really try to build everlasting friendships and relationships, it will work. And even if you're not the necessarily coolest or most drippy person out there, you can still become the person you want to become. And the people around you are not there to tear you down. They're there to help you up. And if they are there to tear you down, get away from them. You don't have to stay in a relationship that isn't healthy.
Are you telling me I don't need to have drip to have friends?
No, you don't, even though you do. Those
Coming
camel pants,
from
though,
Garrett?
they go
Thank you,
crazy.
Thank you. Yeah.
Garrett's dripping out so hard right now. So is Dallin.
I love your shirt.
Everybody's
Dallin,
just
actually.
dripping.
I
Thanks.
like it a lot.
Just know yourself.
Got it for
And
free.
servant
from
leadership
work.
will be much easier.
Know thyself. Got it. It's great. Thank you.
Must one check thyself before they wreck thyself?
Okay.
You
You gotta know yourself
before you wreck
before you know how much to slow yourself. You know what I mean?
Ooh.
And Enoch,
Wisdom.
we every week or every episode we challenge. No, Enoch. Sorry, I can't.
Enoch.
Enoch.
He's just like, Enoch. He like wakes up. He's like, it was amazing. Can we get everyone into their mic real quick? Enoch, 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 Enoch. So well, you gotta say Enoch. Background. Okay, you're the subwoofer
Ready,
here.
ready.
The
Right?
bass.
3, 2, 1. Enoch.
Sorry.
Doesn't like actually ask the
Yeah,
question. I don't know.
sorry.
If
All right. Enoch, every episode we have our guests give a challenge to our listeners for something to practice for the rest of their lives or for the week or for whatever. What would you challenge them to do?
I would challenge them to relax. Relax when you walk into a room and you think, oh man, I look dumb. Relax. Go talk to someone. Take a deep breath. Focus on somebody else. If you're in a leadership position or any position and you're getting flustered or a little anxious and things because things are piling up and whatnot, take a deep breath because that winds up coming out on other people, and just focus on the people. That's what matters, is looking outside of yourself and setting aside the self-centeredness that we don't often think about.
Well, today we talked about French leaders who got their heads chopped off, people's names, the idea of servant leadership, George Washington, and among many other things. I had a great time. Thank you for joining us today, and please continue your great conversations into this week, and we'll see you next time.